My name is Clara Hart. I'm 36 years old, a mother of 3, living in a quiet town outside Madrid, Spain. If you had asked me 5 months ago, I would have described my life as beautifully mundane. Chaotic, yes, but comfortingly predictable. I could never have imagined that May 13th, 2022 would fracture that normalcy forever. That was the day I died, and what I saw beyond the veil of this world left me irrevocably changed. It was one of those dreary Spanish spring mornings, with rain painting streaks across the windows and a chill hanging in the air. The house was alive with its usual morning madness, children rushing to find socks, half-packed school bags spilling their contents, and my youngest whining about forgotten homework. My stress simmered, but I soldiered on, determined to hold the chaos together. As I hurried down the staircase, my youngest's forgotten lunchbox clutched in one hand. My foot missed a step. It happened so quickly. Gravity yanked me down as the world spun around me. The edge of a step caught my back. Pain lanced through me, and for a moment I could feel every nerve in my body screaming in protest. But just as quickly it all stopped. There was silence, no pain, no sound. Just an icy stillness that seemed to seep into my very soul, spreading like frost across a window pane. The next thing I remember was my husband, his arms trembling as he cradled me. "Stay with me, Clara," he whispered, his voice raw with desperation, his words quivering like broken glass. His face hovered above mine, rainwater mixing with his tears. He carried me to the car, my body limp in his arms, as though it no longer belonged to me. The drive to the hospital was a blur. The windshield wipers fought valiantly against the rain, but the world beyond remained a smudged mosaic of red taillights and blurred shapes. My husband's voice trembled as he whispered prayers I couldn't quite make out, his gaze darting between the road and me. I tried to hold on, but something was pulling me away. An invisible force, cold and unyielding. My breaths came in short, shallow gasps as an unbearable weight pressed against my chest. The harder I tried to resist, the more I felt myself slipping. And then, it happened. One moment, I was in the car, cocooned in my husband's arms. The next, I was outside of it, looking at the scene from above. I saw my body, motionless in the passenger seat, my husband gripping the steering wheel, his face etched with anguish. The rain drummed against the car, streaking down the windows, but I couldn't feel it anymore. I felt nothing. No pain, no gravity, no fear. I was free, weightless, and utterly disconnected from the world I had known. The colors around me seemed sharper, more vivid, yet strangely distant, like a painting brought to life. My husband's voice reached me as a faint echo, muffled and distant. I reached out instinctively, desperate to comfort him, to tell him I was still there. But my hand passed through him like smoke, and my words dissolved into the air, unheard. Then, the world around me vanished. The rain, the car, my husband, all of it dissolved into a vast expanse of radiant light. I stood in a realm that words could never do justice. The air shimmered with colors beyond comprehension, hues that danced and pulsed with life. The ground beneath me wasn't solid. It was alive, a flowing energy that seemed to hum with the heartbeat of creation. Despite the breathtaking beauty around me, a knot of unease coiled within my chest. I knew deep down that this was no dream. It was more real than anything I'd ever experienced. And then I saw him. A figure emerged from the distance, walking toward me. His clothing radiated a brilliance that should have blinded me, yet it didn't. Instead, it filled me with awe and a strange sense of familiarity. Though I couldn't make out his features, I felt his gaze pierce through me, seeing everything. My thoughts, my fears, my secrets. Nothing was hidden. "Clara," he said, his voice resonating like a melody I had forgotten but always known. "You cannot stay here. There is something you must see, something you must tell." Before I could respond, the light around me dimmed. Shadows crept in from every direction, and a vision began to unfold before my eyes. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my days. The radiant beauty vanished, replaced by a suffocating darkness so thick it pressed against my soul. Images emerged from the void, vivid and unnervingly clear. It was as if I were watching the world through a vast window, but it wasn't the world I knew. A date flashed before me. 2024. At first, everything seemed peaceful. I saw families laughing at dinner tables, children playing in parks, and the streets of Madrid bustling with life. But the harmony was short-lived. Cracks began to form, not in the ground, but in people. Hairline fractures that spread quickly, dividing hearts and minds. Conflict erupted like wildfire. Husbands turned on wives, parents shouted at children, neighbors became enemies. It wasn't ordinary discord. It was pure, unrestrained rage, a darkness that fed on the anger of humanity. Beneath it all, I saw chains of bitterness and unforgiveness wrapping tighter and tighter around people, choking the life out of them. Then the first wave struck. A shadow swept over the world like a tidal wave. Death came suddenly, indiscriminately, tearing loved ones apart. Homes grew silent, families shattered by grief so raw it seemed to echo in the air. Brilliant minds, doctors, scientists, artists, were cut down in their prime. The world mourned, but the bitterness remained. Yet, amidst the darkness, I saw glimmers of light. Small groups of believers stood firm, their prayers and faith forming shields against the encroaching shadow. Their light pushed back against the darkness, though it came at great cost. The figure's voice broke through the vision. "You must tell them," he said. "The time is shorter than they realize. They must prepare." And just as suddenly as it began, I was pulled back. It wasn't random. These were people bound by the unrelenting grip of unforgiveness. Their refusal to release bitterness had sealed their fate, like a lock forged by their own hands. I turned to the man in radiant white, my voice trembling, barely able to find the words. "Why is this happening?" His face was heavy with sorrow, etched with an ancient grief, and tears welled in his luminous eyes, spilling over like drops of light. "Unforgiveness," he said, his voice resonating with both pain and authority. "It does more than destroy relationships. It poisons the soul, rooting itself so deeply that it consumes everything. In 2024, many will cling to it, unable to let go, and death will claim them. Bitterness binds their hearts with chains they refuse to break." As his words settled over me like a weight, the scenes before me shifted. I saw hospitals overflowing with the sick and dying, their halls echoing with cries of anguish. Cities were cloaked in a suffocating shroud of grief, their lights dimmed by despair. Even the earth itself groaned under the crushing weight of humanity's sins. Disasters swept across the globe with an intensity I could barely comprehend. Hurricanes tore through coastlines, earthquakes reduced cities to rubble, and floods swallowed entire towns. Fires raged unchecked, consuming everything in their path. Nations fell, not just under the pressure of nature's wrath, but through the collapse of human systems, as if the very fabric of society had unraveled. Then I saw them, lines of people stretching endlessly across a barren wasteland. The ground beneath them was cracked and lifeless, the air thick with an unbearable stillness. Their faces were hollow, their eyes cast downward, their shoulders hunched as if carrying invisible weights too heavy to bear. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice a fragile whisper, barely audible. The man in white looked at them, his gaze full of compassion and sorrow. "This is where souls come to give an account," he said, his voice reverent yet sorrowful. Many of these people lived lives filled with worldly success, yet their hearts were hardened. They clung to grudges, refusing to forgive until it was too late. I watched as one soul after another stepped forward, each standing before a moment of reckoning. Their sorrow was palpable, almost tangible, as they saw their lives with unflinching clarity. Every missed opportunity to love, every refusal to extend forgiveness, every moment they chose bitterness over grace played out before them like an unending reel of regret. the vision shifted abruptly and I was taken to a place of torment so overwhelming it defied comprehension. It wasn't the fire that struck me most, though it burned with a relentless fury. It was the suffocating weight of hopelessness. Regret had become a living entity, consuming the souls trapped there. Their wails pierced the air, endless and harrowing, filled with anguish so profound it seemed to vibrate through me. I understood then. These were the souls of those who had chosen hate over love, pride over humility, and bitterness over forgiveness. The man in white openly wept, his tears flowing freely as if mourning each and every soul. "This is not what I desire for them," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "But choices have consequences, and love cannot force its way into a hardened heart." A surge of urgency rose within me, so strong it felt like it would tear me apart. "This can't happen," I wanted to scream, to beg, to plead, but before I could utter a word, the vision changed once more. This time, it was different. I saw light breaking through the darkness like dawn piercing the longest night. People knelt in prayer, tears streaming down their faces as they cried out for mercy. Families who had been fractured by pride and resentment embraced, offering each other forgiveness that seemed to lift invisible weights from their shoulders. Communities gathered together, their hearts united in love and humility. Faces that had once been hardened with anger now glowed with peace, their humility shining like beacons amidst the chaos. "The future is not set," the man said firmly, his voice cutting through the stillness. "This is why you must return. Tell them what you have seen. Warn them that time is shorter than they realize." The desire to stay in that place overwhelmed me. The peace was unlike anything I had ever known, wrapping around me like a warm, protective cloak. But I knew he was right. He looked at me with eyes that held infinite love and unwavering authority. "Clara Hart," he said, my name reverberating like a sacred command. "Your mission is not over. Call them to forgiveness, to love, to truth. The world depends on it." Before I could respond, the light enveloped me, wrapping me in its embrace. I felt myself being pulled back into the chaos of the world I had left behind. When I opened my eyes, I was surrounded by the sterile glow of hospital lights. The rhythmic beeping of monitors echoed in the room, and I saw my husband and children standing nearby, their faces streaked with tears. Relief, disbelief, and overwhelming love poured from them as they gazed at me. My chest felt heavy, not from pain, but from the immense weight of what I had just witnessed. Tears flowed freely down my face as emotions surged through me. One thing was clear: I had been given a second chance, not just to live, but to bring change to the world around me. The days that followed felt like a dream. The hospital room became a fragile sanctuary, a place where I was shielded from the enormity of what I had seen. Yet even in the stillness, the vivid echoes of 2024 refused to leave me. The faces of those left behind, the torment of souls consumed by regret, and the urgent command to share his message burned within me like an unquenchable fire. When I was finally discharged, I knew with absolute certainty that my life would never, ever be the same. My husband Daniel drove me home, his face a mix of relief and exhaustion. The tension in his jaw had softened, but the way his hands gripped the steering wheel told me he was holding back a flood of questions. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and glistening under the dim glow of streetlights. The silence between us was heavy, not awkward, but loaded with thoughts neither of us could yet voice. That night, after the kids were asleep and the house had settled into its usual nighttime quiet, Daniel and I sat across from each other at the dining table. The hum of the refrigerator in the background was the only sound. My hands trembled as I wrapped them around my warm cup of tea, trying to anchor myself in the moment. "Daniel," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you." Slowly, haltingly, I began to recount everything. The visions, the overwhelming presence of the man clothed in brilliant white, the words that pierced my soul, and the things I had seen. As the story spilled out, Daniel's expression shifted from shock to something deeper, a mix of awe, concern, and disbelief. When I finally finished, the silence stretched between us. He leaned forward, gripping my hand so tightly I could feel his strength and fear all at once. "Clara," he said, his voice low but steady. "How do we even begin to tell people something like this?" Tears welled up in my eyes as I squeezed his hands, willing my voice not to break. "We start with us," I said. "We forgive. We let go of the grudges we've held. We love each other with everything we have. And then we share it with anyone who will listen. Daniel, we can't keep this to ourselves. People need to know." The next morning, I woke early, before the first hints of dawn painted the sky. The house was still and quiet, but my heart was anything but. Kneeling by my bed, I poured out everything in prayer. The fear, the doubts, the gratitude, the overwhelming sense of purpose. "God, I can't do this alone," I whispered. "I need your strength, your clarity, your guidance." As I prayed, a quiet resolve began to take root in my heart. Gratitude swelled within me. I had been given a second chance, a chance to live, to love, and to make things right. Not just for myself, but for others. I could still hear Jesus' words echoing in my spirit. "Tell them what you have seen." I knew exactly where I had to begin, with my own family. It wasn't easy. Healing decades of hurt and mistrust never is. Old wounds, the kind buried deep under layers of silence and pride, are the hardest to uncover. But I knew what was at stake. One by one, I picked up the phone and made the calls I had been dreading for years. My voice trembled as I apologized, sincerely, deeply, without any concern for who was right or wrong. The responses surprised me. My siblings, once distant and guarded, broke down in tears. My parents, whose voices had grown cold over the years, softened. The walls that had separated us began to crumble, brick by brick. It wasn't perfect. Healing rarely is. But it was a start. A glimpse of the power of forgiveness and what it could do when hearts were open. But that was only the beginning. The next step was far more daunting. Sharing the message with the world. The doubts crept in again, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. Who am I to do this? I thought. I'm not a pastor or a writer. I'm not anyone important. I'm just a 36-year-old mother from Madrid. But then I remembered something I had once heard. God doesn't call the equipped. He equips the called. Clinging to that truth, I took my first leap of faith. I began speaking at local churches, sharing my testimony with anyone willing to listen. At first, I was terrified. My voice shook, my hands trembled, and I stumbled over my words. But then something incredible happened. People didn't just listen, they felt it. Tears streamed down their faces as they confronted the weight of their own unforgiveness. After each service, strangers approached me, their voices trembling, their eyes wet with emotion. They confessed their struggles, their grudges, their estranged relationships, and vowed to make amends. But not everyone welcomed the message. Some dismissed me outright, calling me a fool or delusional. A few mocked me, their laughter cutting deeper than I cared to admit. There were nights when I wanted to retreat into silence, to let the weight of it all crush me into anonymity. But every time doubt threatened to consume me, I remembered the man in white. I remembered the tears in his eyes, the love in his voice. He wasn't asking for perfection. He was asking for obedience. One evening, as I prepared to speak at yet another church, I knelt by my bed, tears spilling freely onto the sheets. "God, I'm not strong enough for this," I whispered. "It's too much." In the stillness, his words came back to me, steady and clear. "Tell them what you have seen." That night, something shifted. As I stood before the congregation, a boldness filled me, one that wasn't my own. My voice didn't shake. My words were clear. 2025 is not just a warning, I declared, scanning the faces before me. It's an opportunity, a chance to forgive, to love, and to return to God before it's too late. Yes, what I saw was terrifying, but it wasn't the end of the story. There is hope. There is always hope. The room fell silent. It was as though every person there was holding their breath, their eyes fixed on mine. I could feel it. Hearts breaking open, walls crumbling, chains of bitterness and pride falling away. Looking back now, I understand that the visions of 2025 weren't just for me. They were for all of us. A wake-up call. A glimpse of what happens when we let anger, pride, and unforgiveness consume us. But also a reminder that it's never too late to change, to rewrite the story with love, grace, and humility. I don't know everything about what's to come, but I do know this. The same God who revealed those visions is the same God who offers redemption. And as long as I have breath in my lungs, I will keep sharing his message. One heart, one soul, one life at a time. Now I ask you, yes you, reading or hearing these words, will you let go of the bitterness, the pain, the grudges you've carried for far too long? Will you choose love, forgiveness, and the unshakable peace that only Jesus can offer? The choice is yours. The time is now. Let's face 2025 together, not with fear, but with faith.